Look at this number, 4 hours. This wasn't a threat buried in a diplomatic cable, nor was it a rumor from back-channel intelligence. This was a public, direct military announcement from Tehran. Iran just issued a 4-hour ultimatum to the entire world. In exactly 4 hours, every energy site in the region will be targeted simultaneously. We are talking about every category of energy infrastructure that keeps the modern world alive. Oil refineries, oil fields, natural gas facilities, LNG plants, storage terminals, export ports, and even power and water plants. Iran put them all on the target list at once. And folks, why does this 4-hour countdown matter so much? Because it happened just as oil markets were about to open. Donald Trump's response? He rushed straight to the microphone. There was no detailed military briefing, no specific operational plan. Instead, he announced that the U.S. would use force to open the Strait of Hormuz, promising a major operation was coming. But understand the nature of this move. This wasn't a military order. It was a desperate market intervention. The White House was trying to talk oil prices down before the opening bell by creating the impression that America had the situation under control. But the reality is that Washington is in a panic. They know that if they can't reassure investors in those 4 short hours, oil prices will explode the moment the trading bell rings. Tonight, as the world holds its breath looking toward the Gulf, the contrast between Iran's cold ultimatum and Trump's political theater exposes a brutal truth. America is using rhetoric to face loaded missiles, and Tehran's clock doesn't stop for any statement from the Rose Garden. Iran's ultimatum didn't come out of thin air. It wasn't a random move on a military chessboard. It is the direct result of a humanitarian and environmental catastrophe unfolding right now on Iranian soil. The American and Israeli airstrikes on Iranian oil facilities didn't just destroy storage tanks. They turned the very atmosphere into a silent, lethal weapon. The air above Iran's targeted energy infrastructure has become terrifyingly toxic. We are talking about a deadly cocktail of benzene, hydrogen sulfide, sulfur dioxide, and heavy metal particulates. This isn't ordinary smoke, it's a petrochemical cocktail capable of devastating the human respiratory system and causing cancer after even short-term exposure. Listen to what Iranian health authorities are telling their people. Any food in your home that isn't sealed, throw it away immediately. Your water filtration systems are contaminated. Replace the filters now because they are filled with toxic particles. Do not breathe the outdoor air without protection. Imagine that for a civilian population. Your air is poisoned. Your food supply is compromised. Your water is contaminated. This is no longer collateral damage from a precision strike. This is large-scale environmental destruction affecting every living thing within a 100-mile radius. Iran looked at that reality, looked at the toxic sky killing its civilians, and made a cold calculation. We will now do the same to every energy site in your region. Iran isn't just threatening to fire missiles, they are threatening to create a symmetrical ecological disaster. They are telling the Gulf states that if Iranian cities cannot breathe, then Dubai, Doha, and Abu Dhabi will be forced to breathe that same death. Tonight, this conflict has crossed the line of artillery and missiles to become a war of existential destruction, where the living environment of millions is being used as a retaliatory card. Iran sent a message of chilling logic. Our domestic oil is cheap. We supply our own people regardless of global prices. We can sustain $200 oil indefinitely. Can you? Can your economy? Can your voters? The answer, if you look at what $200 oil actually does to the global system, is no. An emphatic, structural, and mathematical no. At $2 to $100 per barrel, jet fuel prices make commercial aviation economically non-viable for most carriers. At $2 to $100 per barrel, every product transported by truck, which is essentially everything that moves in a modern economy, doubles or triples in shelf price. Heating costs in Europe become unmanageable for working-class households. More importantly, the agricultural system that feeds 8 billion people, which runs on fuel-dependent machinery and petrochemical-dependent fertilizers, faces input costs that translate directly into food prices that hundreds of millions of people cannot afford. This is not economic disruption. This is economic collapse by another name. and Iran is holding the trigger. They know that while Iranians are accustomed to hardship, Western societies will splinter long before the oil price even hits that peak. Look at what is happening on the diplomatic front, where the cracks can no longer be hidden. Oman, the country long considered the Switzerland of the Middle East, the most quiet and carefully neutral entity in the entire Gulf, has just issued a public statement that sent shockwaves through Washington. Muscat declared that the actions of the U.S. and Israel against Iran are illegal and constitute the worst aggression in the region's modern history. When a country as reserved and cautious as Oman uses such forceful language in public, you can be certain that the private conversations happening in other Gulf capitals like Riyadh or Abu Dhabi are significantly more severe. Washington is losing the support of the very partners it claims to be protecting. But the diplomatic disaster doesn't stop there. In Moscow, the Russian foreign minister met with Gulf ambassadors this week. When the ambassadors requested that Russia pressure Iran to stop the attacks, the Russian response landed like a slap. You want us to pressure Iran? Has anyone condemned America for killing over 200 schoolgirls in the strikes on Iran? Has anyone brought a resolution against Israel and America, the countries that started this war yet? The room went silent, because the answer is no. 9 days into a war started by American and Israeli strikes on Iranian soil, the international diplomatic machinery seems to be moving only to condemn the party that was attacked rather than the attackers. Iran has noticed this, and that is why their 4-hour clock is still ticking. Russia has signaled clearly they will use their veto at the Security Council to block any attempt to impose sanctions or unilateral ceasefires on Tehran. The diplomatic route that the Gulf states hoped would de-escalate the conflict is now locked in Moscow, leaving Washington alone in a war where they can no longer find genuine allies by their side. Let this sentence exist in the air for a moment so we can see its full absurdity. The White House is considering sending Delta Force commandos deep into Iranian territory to seize 400 kilograms of uranium and destroy the remaining oil facilities. You did not mishear that. In the midst of a long-range war involving hypersonic missiles and drones, Washington is dreaming of a real-life Hollywood action movie scenario. But folks, here is the reality. Delta Force typically operates in countries with fractured governments, minimal air defenses, and limited military capacity. This is Iran, a nation of 90 million people, with 31 military command centers operating simultaneously, and a military that has spent the last 40 years preparing for one specific scenario, a U.S. ground incursion. We are talking about sending special operations teams into a hornet's nest that possesses hypersonic missiles capable of taking out aircraft carriers. In just the past week, Iran has proven it can destroy half of America's Patriot defense systems in the region, force a carrier strike group to retreat, and eliminate a $1 billion radar installation. Yet, people in the Situation Room in Washington are discussing putting boots on the ground in a theater where even our most modern warships dare not approach. The Delta Force option is not a viable military plan. It is what happens when actual military options have run out and the people in the room are grasping for something that sounds decisive. It reveals a terrifying misunderstanding of the scale of this conflict. You cannot use a few dozen or a few hundred special forces to subdue a nation with the strategic depth and internal cohesion of Iran. Every move the U.S. has made in the last 9 days has been based on the assumption that technological superiority would create an unchallengeable advantage, converting any confrontation into a manageable operation with predictable costs. That assumption has failed miserably. The bombing campaign intended to trigger an internal collapse in Iran did not happen. Instead, it only increased the enemy's unity and pushed them into a nothing left to lose stance. Tonight, as the White House discusses special ops, they aren't projecting strength, they are exposing the desperation of a superpower bogged down in a mire created by its own military arrogance. While Washington is preoccupied with far-fetched commando plans, our closest allies across the Atlantic are facing a brutal reality. Europe sits in the most vulnerable position in this geopolitical game. They spent the last 2 years priding themselves on severing their dependence on Russian gas. But the price of that freedom was tethering themselves to LNG from the Gulf. And now, as Iran threatens to turn those waters into an inferno, Europe is watching its only lifeline evaporate. Look at the hard numbers. Britain's gas reserves are depleting at an unprecedented rate. Germany's industrial base, the economic engine of the entire continent, is collapsing under the weight of energy costs. Production decisions are stalling, and what were previously seen as sanctions to restrain Russia are now backfiring, incinerating their own economies. Europe has moved from being a Moscow energy hostage to a victim of a Middle East conflict they have no control over. China offered an analysis that so far appears to be the most accurate. America is the variable causing the chaos. Beijing argues that if you remove America's unconditional support for escalating military actions, regional negotiations would have a chance to cool down. But America's presence has converted a regional dispute into a global confrontation with no ceiling. Europe is paying the price for following a symptom-treating strategy. They focused on changing the supply source while ignoring the root cause of the instability. Tonight, as governments in London, Berlin, and Paris quietly ask Russia to mediate, they have officially admitted the failure of their energy and foreign policies led by Washington. They bet the entire safety of their people on a gamble where the U.S. was the dealer, only to realize now that the dealer has lost complete control over the board. Europe has no third option sitting in reserve. They are standing on the brink of a great energy depression that even White House promises cannot stop as toxic fumes spread from incinerated oil facilities. This is the part that war reports often overlook, but it is decisive in whether the global economy collapses next week. When we talk about blocking the Strait of Hormuz, people usually think about ships being unable to enter or exit. But there is a far more brutal physical consequence happening behind the border posts. Oil storage tanks in producing nations are filling up by the hour. Look at the numbers for the remaining storage capacity of Gulf nations. This is the real countdown clock. Iraq has only 6 days of remaining oil storage capacity. Kuwait has 14 days. The UAE and Qatar have roughly 15 to 20 days. Saudi Arabia, the region's giant, has roughly 60 days. But weeks of that buffer have already been consumed due to stalled shipments. What happens when these tanks are full? You cannot simply let the oil spill onto the ground. You have to stop production. And when you shut down oil wells and refineries because there is no place left to put the product, you cannot turn them back on with the flip of a switch. Abrupt production stops destroy oil field pressure and damage refinery infrastructure. Global supply won't just dip, it will collapse entirely while global demand remains unchanged. Iran knows this well. They don't need to use missiles to destroy every enemy oil well. They only need to maintain the threat so that tankers dare not dock, causing the energy storage systems of America's allies to collapse from within due to overflow. This is a mathematically perfect economic siege. While Washington is busy discussing sending commandos into Iran, our Gulf allies are facing an existential crisis. If they cannot export oil in the next few days, their entire economies will freeze because production infrastructure will seize up. Tonight, the oil price isn't just rising because of scarcity on the market, it is rising because of the fear that the world's supply system is nearing a stalling point with no way back. This war has only been running for 9 days. But in those 9 days, we have witnessed the collapse of an illusion that has defined American foreign policy for 3 decades. That overwhelming military technological power can solve any conflict with predictable costs. That illusion has shattered against an adversary with real preparation, real technology, and real institutional resilience. We must face a brutal truth. The world we once knew, where American presence was the default stabilizing factor, where Gulf cities were the safest places on the planet, and where energy prices were a manageable policy variable, that world is gone and is not coming back. Iran has proven that it can not only absorb strikes, but also escalate the conflict from cheap drones to hypersonic missiles capable of paralyzing an entire fleet. Look at Russia's position now. A nation that 2 years ago was sanctioned and isolated is now standing in a position where both Europe and the Gulf states are pleading for them to act as a mediator. Russia didn't need to win in Ukraine to win strategically. They just had to wait for America to overextend elsewhere, and we handed them that opportunity on a silver platter. Tonight, Europe's energy security is in Moscow's hands, and Washington's credibility lies at the bottom of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has sent its final message. the real attack, the one targeting every energy site simultaneously, has not even happened yet. The 4-hour clock has struck, the markets have opened, and oil is ticking toward $2 to $100. Our future now depends not on threats from the Rose Garden, but on whether we are brave enough to admit that the muscle strategy has failed before the global economy explodes.